My name is Delphine Okafor and I'm 35 years old, and my family introduces me as still finding her footing. Tonight, at the dinner where my sister presented her new fiancé like a prize she'd won, my mother cut me off before I could finish answering his very first question, and the whole table laughed on cue. What my mother didn't know was that the polite stranger passing her the rolls had spent 16 months looking for me, not for my sister, for me. And what happened 10 months later, at my sister's wedding, under a garden I had personally brought back from ruin, in front of a national magazine's photo crew, my family still can't talk about. I've had a lot of practice being the only one at the table telling the truth. Welcome back to Calm Drama Vault, where family secrets come to light and quiet women find their voice. If you've ever been the one your family underestimated, the one they talked over, the one they explained away, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe. The dinner was at my parents' house in Willow Creek, Georgia, and I knew it was a performance before I got my coat off. The good china was out. My sister Camille had made the shrimp and grits she'd perfected for her sorority's spring formal a decade ago, and I was the sister they always left out of the holiday card photo. I came straight from my nursery, 20 minutes across town, and I'd scrubbed my hands twice, but potting soil lives under your nails like a confession. My mother seated me at the end by the china cabinet, outside what she calls the conversation zone, and that was normal. What wasn't normal was the staring dot all through the salad. My family kept glancing at me the way you glance at a crack in a windshield, not with interest, with dread. My mother, Camille, even my father, Walter, peering over his glasses and then away. I checked my blouse for stains. Nothing. The fiancé was the only one who looked at me like a person. Marcus, tall, careful manners, the kind of listener who turns his whole chair toward you. He asked my dad about his koi pond and actually followed up. Camille watched him the way you watch a lottery ticket. My mother watched him the way you watch an appraiser. And in the gaps, everyone watched me. Warning looks passed around the table like a dish nobody wanted to hold. I'd been in this family 35 years. And I still couldn't read the whole code, but I knew the channel it came in on. Something about tonight was fragile. And they'd all agreed in advance the breakable thing was me. Then Marcus turned, gave me his whole chair, and asked the politest question in the world. And what do you do, Delphine? My mother set down her fork with the sound of a gavel. Don't embarrass us. She said it lightly, brightly, the way you'd say more wine. And that is exactly what made it land like a slap. This wasn't anger. It was procedure. The table laughed. Not cruel laughter, which somehow would have been kinder. Rehearsed laughter. The laughter of people who had heard this bit before and knew their part. My aunt tittered into her napkin. My dad studied his plate, like it contained a message. And my sister, glowing, radiant, 10 hours away from perfect, leaned toward me with the smile she saves for cameras and said, "Maybe lie this time so you don't sound so pathetic." More laughter, warmer now, relieved. The crack had been sealed safely back into the windshield. Marcus didn't laugh. I noticed that even then. He looked from my sister to my mother to me, the way a man checks a room's exits. I sat there with my hands in my lap, and I did the thing I have done at that table since I was 12. I smiled. I counted to 10 the way I count breaths when I'm grafting a rose. Even pressure, no tearing. Any other year, that would have been the whole story. Smile, pass the rolls, drive back to the nursery, talk to the plants. The plants are more polite. But that afternoon, I had come off a job restoring a historic estate garden in Savannah, and my hands still smelled like 80 years of somebody else's neglect. And something in me was tired in a brand new place, so I didn't just smile this time. I opened my mouth. "I'm a landscape restorer," I said, in the same voice I used to tell clients their overgrown yard is salvageable. I bring dead gardens back to life. That was all. Both true, level as a garden bed. My mother inhaled through her nose. The sound of a correction being loaded, and pivoted to the honeymoon question she'd been saving. Because in her house, the way you handle a mess is you talk over it until it agrees to not exist. Camille picked it up on cue. Grease, maybe turkey. And the table rolled on, relieved, and I reached for the rolls, already retreating back into my usual assignment, which is being furniture. Except Marcus hadn't moved. He was looking at me, and his glass was suspended halfway between the table and his mouth. Forgotten. There was an expression assembling itself on his face in slow motion. He set the glass down with the care of a man diffusing something. "I'm sorry," he said, and the table kept talking. "Okafor, louder." The table quieted. "Okafor Landscape Restoration, out on Blossom Street," I said. "That's my company." "Yes." And Marcus did something no one has ever done at that table in my honor. He laughed one short, amazed note and pulled out his phone. His thumbs moved. He turned the screen around. On it was a photograph of a Victorian formal garden. Boxwood hedges cut into perfect geometric knots. A restored fountain glowing in golden light. I knew it the way you know your own signature. I'd spent 7 months of my life on my knees in that dirt. You did this, Marcus said. This is our foundation's property. My mother has been trying to reach you for 16 months. You could hear the refrigerator hum from 2 rooms away. My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do. It went looking for a script and came back empty. Camille's fork stopped in the air with a shrimp still on it. Marcus kept going because he had no idea he was rearranging a house as he spoke. His family ran the Ashworth Foundation for Historic Preservation, a name even my mother knew from the Garden Club newsletter she pretends not to read. They had underwritten the restoration of Cedarla Estate, the antebellum property out on River Road, and the selection committee had ranked one landscape restorer first for the formal gardens. Me, Okafor, the only documented apprentice of Ruth Pemberton, who'd restored Cedarla the last time back in 1991. We wrote to your company twice, Marcus said, bewildered, almost laughing again. You're a hard woman to reach. I said I was behind on my mail, which was true, and did not say that I assumed anything embossed was junk, which was also true. My mother rebooted mid. I'll give her that. Well, she said, patting the table like it was a nervous horse. Delphine, she's always been artistic. And Marcus, polite, unbudging, terribly sincere, said, Mrs. Okafor, the committee doesn't rank dabblers. Nobody laughed at that. My sister was looking at me with an expression I genuinely could not name, because I had never seen it aimed at me before. Recalculation. The fiancé staged this whole dinner to impress. Had spent the evening trying not to stare at the family embarrassment, because where he came from, the embarrassment was the celebrity. My mother reached for the wine and refilled glasses that were already full. She got me alone in the kitchen while the others had coffee, under the pretense of the dessert plates. My mother has a special voice for damage control, low and administrative, the voice of a hospital billing office, which is what she ran for 24 years. You will not take that job, she said, scraping frosting off a plate with surgical strokes. I asked why not. Because that estate is where your sister is getting married. If this goes where it's going, you'd be underfoot at Camille's venue for months. Ladders, dirt, you in coveralls while his family walks through in suits. She rinsed the plate, set it in the rack, and looked at me, and for one strange second, I saw the thing underneath the whole performance. Not contempt, fear. With 30 years of management training, this wedding is bigger than your hobby, Delphine. One wrong impression, and people decide things about a family. That's all it takes. One, and there it was. The operating system laid bare on the kitchen counter. She had never once asked if I was good, because good wasn't the metric. Explainable was the metric. A daughter in coveralls was a liability, no matter what her hands could raise from the dead. I dried my hands on her good towel and said I'd think about it, which we both knew was my polite lie. The single dialect of mine she's fluent in. I drove back to the nursery with the windows down. Above my workbench, taped where Ruth left it, is a yellowed card in her block printing. Nobody claps for the compost. It feeds everything anyway. At 11, my laptop pinged. The Cedarla Preservation Trust. Formal invitation to consult. Subject line, gardens. I read it 3 times and slept like a stone. Camille called the next morning, half apology, half audit. She wanted to know why I'd made it weird at dinner, which is our family's phrase for telling the truth in a load-bearing location. And in the tangle of it, the staring finally got explained. They'd briefed him, before I ever walked in. My mother had prepared Marcus the way you prep a guest for a dog that bites. Delphine is between things. She's a bit lost. Don't ask her too much. It's a sore subject. That's why the whole table had spent the salad course watching me like weather. They were waiting to see if the story would hold. I was a managed risk at my own family's table. It wasn't mean, Camille insisted. Mom just wanted the night to go well. Marcus's family is, you don't understand what they're like. Everything matters with these people. I said it sounded exhausting, everything mattering, and she laughed before she remembered we weren't like that with each other. Then she went quiet. And in the quiet, she said the truest thing anyone in my family has ever said to me. You weren't supposed to matter tonight. I heard her hear it, the little intake of breath. I didn't mean it like that, Del. I looked across the nursery at Ruth's card above the bench. The compost that feeds everything. and I felt the sentence settle into place like a graft taking hold. Snug, permanent, load-bearing. It explained 35 years in a handful of words. Nobody ever means it, I said. That's the whole problem. I told her congratulations again and meant it, and hung up. Then I opened the trust's email and typed 4 words I'd been circling all night. I'd be honored. When can we start? You should know how I got here, because my mother's version has me wandering off a sensible path into the weeds. Here's mine. At 19, I did 1 semester of business administration at the community college, picked because my mother had a speech about health insurance and a framed idea of a daughter behind a desk. That October, our church hired an old woman to restore the neglected memorial garden at Grace Chapel, and I stayed after choir to watch her work. Her name was Ruth Pemberton. She was 73 then, hands like tree bark. And she touched that dying rosebed the way paramedics touch people. I asked if it was hopeless. She said, "Nothing's hopeless. Some things are just waiting for somebody patient." I dropped business by Thanksgiving, and my mother didn't speak to me for a month, which she called dignity, and I later learned to call weather. 14 years I apprenticed under Ruth. Soil chemistry, historic plant varieties, the ethics of it. First, do nothing you can't undo. Ruth died 3 winters ago, 91. In her own garden, which is the only place she'd have agreed to do it. She left me her client list, her tools, and a greenhouse with a leaking roof. I built my own nursery on Blossom Street. I talked to my roses more than I talked to my mother. The roses are more polite. Here's the detail that matters, though. The one I didn't see myself for years. The sign out front says Okafor, Landscape Restoration. No first name, no photograph in the local paper ever. I've declined 3 times. 14 years of work. And I had never once signed a garden, never hung my name where a person could point at it. I told myself that was humility. Keep that in your pocket. We'll need it later. The Setterla Preservation Trust met at the estate itself, which was theater. And it worked. Overgrown paths cleared for the walkthrough, light through ancient oaks, and there it all was. Formal gardens laid out in 1840, choked with 60 years of neglect. The fountain dry and cracked. The boxwood knots grown wild past recognition. My chest ached in the first minute, and I didn't care. The offer: full formal gardens and fountain restoration. 10 months, $52,000, including materials. Fair money, honest scope, the job of my life. Then the trust director slid over the media addendum. A magazine called Southern Heritage National, the good kind. Gardens and Dying Trades and Craftsmen had partnered with the restoration's funders. They'd photograph the progress and the finished estate in use for a bride's issue. My mouth went dry in a way $52,000 couldn't fix. I asked for a personal carve-out. No on-camera interviews. Credit in text only. The director raised an eyebrow. Most contractors ask for more coverage, not less. But she allowed it, and I signed with the fountain pen Ruth left me. And if my hand shook, nobody said so. On the way out, a woman flagged me down in the parking lot. Mrs. Ellery, the retired librarian, gardening gloves and no preamble. "Delphine Okafor, I'm still cross with you. You know?" I asked what I'd done. "Last spring, we invited you to exhibit at the library, the history of local horticulture. We wanted your restoration photographs, and you turned us down flat. Didn't even write back yourself?" I stood there in the gravel with my contract under my arm. I had never received any invitation. "Mrs. Ellery," I said slowly, "who told you I turned it down?" "Before I tell you that," she answered, "you need one more piece of Ruth, because she's load-bearing too." 3rd year of my apprenticeship. Grace Chapel again. The old magnolia in the memorial garden split down the trunk after a storm. I was 21 and ambitious, and I wanted to make the split disappear. I'd planned the whole invisible repair, filling and bracing hidden inside the bark. Ruth watched me lay it out, then put her weathered hand flat on the split. "What happened to this tree?" I said. "A storm." "So it's true, then." "The split," I said, obviously. "Then why are you about to make it lie?" She showed me instead. A steel brace, visible, honest, set proud where anyone could see. Holding the 2 halves together without hiding what had happened. That magnolia still blooms every spring. The split has held for 12 years. What she said while we set the brace is the closest thing I have to a religion. We don't hide the damage. We make it strong enough to hold. I have applied that sentence to 1,000 gardens, formal beds, memorial trees, one entire estate. Here is what I had never once applied it to. And I can see it now from this distance. Myself. My whole life in that family was an invisible repair. Prune yourself smooth, match the shape they wanted. vanish into the hedge. Don't be the crack in mother's story. 14 years I gave other people's dying gardens their dignity back. And the whole time, my own name was a split I kept covering over. Mrs. Ellery was about to hand me the brace that would finally hold it open. She looked at me funny in that parking lot and said, "Why, your mother, dear. She answers for you." First Sunday dinner after that, my mother ran her counterattack like a quarterly review. She waited for the pot roast to land and then announced to the table, not to me, that's the technique, that the $15,000 Grandma and Grandpa had set aside years ago for my greenhouse repair would be held for wedding costs instead. Weddings come first. The roof will keep. The roof, for the record, was leaking onto my most delicate cuttings every time it rained. She knew none of that, and all of it. She didn't need the blueprint to know where to press. Then the second barrel, delivered with a smile to the gravy. Henderson's Landscaping is hiring. By the way, a real crew position. Something I can say out loud at church when people ask about you. There it was again. Her one commandment. I did not fight at the table. You don't win at her table. The table is hers. I did the math on the drive home instead. 52,000 minus materials minus 10 months of living. The Cedarla job would carry the nursery but not a new roof too. So I picked up weekend work. Landscaping for a garden center in Atlanta. Driving 2 hours each way. Days under Georgia's sun restoring history. Weekends hauling mulch for strangers' backyards. You want to know what a woman's worth in my family? Check what she's allowed to struggle for. Now, Mrs. Ellery. She forwarded me the email chain that week, apologizing for the fuss. And I sat at my potting bench and read my own obituary in my mother's prose. The library's invitation sent to my old contact address. My parents' house, from back when I was an apprentice and had no address of my own. And the reply from my mother's account, polite as a sympathy card. My daughter is no longer working in this field. Please remove her from your list and do not contact her again. No longer working in this field. I checked the date. It was the same month I'd finished a memorial garden for the county museum. She'd seen it in the paper, uncredited, and asked why I wasted my time on other people's dirt. Mrs. Ellery, bless her card catalog memory, recalled at least 2 other approaches over the years. A garden club talk, a school career day, same address, same answering service. Each one declined in my name kindly. I want to be careful here because it matters. I don't think my mother sat cackling in the dark. I think she truly believed she was steering a wayward daughter around potholes. Every door she closed was, in her arithmetic, one less chance for me to stand in public wearing coveralls and shame her. That's what made it worse. Malice you can argue with. Arithmetic just runs. I sat there a long time with the nursery quiet around me, all those rescued gardens listening, and I understood the shape of my own life for the first time. My mother didn't hide me from the world. She hid the world from me and called it housekeeping. I didn't call her. There was no version of that call where anyone heard a crack and thought to reinforce it. Instead, I went to work restoring a garden planted in 1840, and I started digging. Cedarly's formal gardens went from ruin to renewal, starting that November, acre by acre. The first day, I did what Ruth taught me to do with any dying thing. I walked the whole perimeter slowly, just looking. Up close, the neglect came apart into detail. A wisteria arbor collapsed under its own weight. A boxwood maze grown so wild it had lost its own shape. The gardener's original vision still alive underneath a century of overgrowth. And one long dead section near the fountain where nothing had bloomed in decades. I knelt down and pressed my palm flat against the soil, not planting yet. Ruth's ritual. You introduce yourself first. 10 months, I told it. I've got you. And I need you to hear this next part the way it happened. Plain. No violins. While I was kneeling there, the venue manager walked her clipboard across the lawn and called over, friendly as a doorbell. Big year coming. We're booked solid after your reveal. First events locked in already. August wedding. Okafor Swarth party. Any relation? I did not stand up right away. Somewhere behind me, a mockingbird went on singing to an empty garden. My sister, of course. Camille wanted the finest estate in the county, and the finest estate in the county was going to be fine because of me. And nobody in my family had connected those two facts, because connecting them would require saying my name and the word restorer in the same sentence. Distant, I called back, which is the truest thing I've ever said, kneeling in dirt. So there it was. The whole second half of my story laid out like a planting schedule. Every hour of the next 10 months, I would be restoring the gardens of my sister's wedding. My mother came to the nursery in December. 35 years, and it was her first time through that door. She stood in the middle of my greenhouse, the potted seedlings, the wall of tools, the memorial oak sapling waiting for its museum planting, 14 years of resurrections. And she looked at none of it. She stood the way you stand in an airport lounge, coat on, purse held in both hands, a woman refusing to check her bags into my life. I'll come to it, she said, and came to it. Withdraw from the Cedarla contract. I'll give you $20,000. More than the roof, more than grandma's money. Consider it a business decision. I asked her to explain the business. She did, and I'll say this for my mother, when she finally shows you her ledger, she doesn't flinch. The wedding was the merger of her lifetime, our family marrying an Ashworth, and every variable needed managing. A sister on her knees at the venue was a veritable. A sister in coveralls when the in-laws did their walkthrough was a variable. One wrong impression, Delphine, people decide things about a family. I listened all the way to the end. Then I told her the truth in the only language I fully own. This one isn't reversible, Mom. First rule of my trade, never do what you can't undo. I signed. It's load-bearing now. She looked at me for a long moment, and something moved behind her face. That wasn't anger. Inventory. Maybe a recount coming out wrong. At the door, she paused with her hand on the frame. Then stay off the property in August, she said, and was gone. The bell over the door rang bright and stupid into the quiet. $20,000 to not exist at my sister's wedding. My dad came by 2 weeks later with a bag of pecans and a thing he needed to put down. He walked the greenhouse slow, touched the memorial oak's leaves like it might startle, and then he sat on the stool by the potting bench and told me about the shoes. My mother, 16 years old, at a private academy on a scholarship. Her father, my grandpa Elias, I never met him, worked as the school groundskeeper, 30 years of mowed lawns. And the mothers at pickup, the ones with luxury cars, used to do a bit when Sandra walked past. They'd talk about the help's daughter just loud enough. Girls in her class picked it up. Whispered when Sandra answered in class. Whispered when Sandra won the scholarship essay. Her shoes were hand-me-downs one whole year. My dad said, looking at his hands. She showed me the photo once when we were courting, and then never again. Made me swear. He took a pecan he didn't eat. The day you told her you were quitting business school for gardening, she cried in the garage where you couldn't see. Not because she thinks the work is beneath anybody, because she spent 40 years getting that whisper out of this family's name. And you walked right back into the dirt on purpose. We sat with that. The greenhouse fan hummed. It doesn't make it right, he said finally, which was the bravest sentence of his marriage. But you should have the whole ledger. Then he asked me not to tell her he'd told me, and he went home to her, the way he always goes home to her. And I sat alone with the pecans and a brand new problem. It is so much easier to fight a villain than a wound wearing your mother's coat. The wedding invitation arrived in March. Heavy creamstock, Cedarla estate pressed into it blind, which meant I could feel my own job under my thumb like Braille. Beautiful thing. And behind it, 2 days later, the phone call with the terms. My mother's list voice. The Ashworths would be hosting relatives from 4 states. The photographer was booked for the walkthrough, and I would attend. She was glad I'd attend, she said, and I believe she was, as Camille's sister, who was between jobs. It's simpler, Delphine. One evening, you'll say you're between jobs. Don't embarrass us twice. Twice. I stood in my nursery with the phone against my ear, looking at the wall where 14 years of other people's gardens had gotten their names back. And I want to be honest with you about the pull of it. Every family has a currency, and mine pays in one coin. Being no trouble. I had been rich in it my whole life. All I had to do was stay rich one more evening. Instead, I looked at the RSVP card with its 2 little boxes and its blank line for names, and I wrote in the good ink, in my steadiest lettering, Delphine, Okafor, landscape restorer, Cedarla estate, attending, no +1, no explanation, just the truth in a single line. I walked it to the mailbox on the corner that same hour, so I couldn't reconsider. And when the lid clanged shut, it sounded exactly like pruning shears closing on the last stubborn branch. There are cuts you can graft back and cuts you can't. I stood on the corner in the March wind and understood calmly, fully, that I had just made the second kind. My mother received the truth by mail. She did not call. Her silence had a size to it. The next months I can give you in strokes the way a garden gives up its seasons. Weekend drives to Atlanta, mulching strangers' yards until my back ached, then up at dawn Monday to restore history. Spring, the dead section near the fountain surrendered inch by inch. Under it, Heirloom roses nobody had seen bloom clearly since before my grandmother was born, came back with color the original planter absolutely intended. I logged every soil amendment, every graft in the bound journal Ruth kept hers in. Some evenings I fell asleep on a garden bench, flat under a sky that was slowly remembering the estate's original design. And every few weeks the funders visited. That is how I met Vivian Ashworth, Marcus's mother, chair of the foundation, a woman my mother's age who wore quiet like other people wear jewelry. First visit, she walked the whole overgrown perimeter in her good boots without being invited, knelt down beside me without being asked, and studied the heirloom roses for a full minute. Own rootstock, she said finally. Grafted onto period-appropriate rootstock for the fountain bed, I said. She nodded the way examiners nod. No small talk about my clothes. No translation of me for the donors. She asked about soil pH the way other people ask about weather. And listened to the answers. On her third visit, she said conversationally, "Gardens Ward, you're the bride's sister." I put it together from the trust paperwork. A pause, one heartbeat long. "Odd, your family told us you were between jobs." I kept my eyes on the fountain bed. "I'm never between jobs," I said. "Just between thank yous." Vivian Ashworth laughed exactly once, like a gate and from that day forward, there were 2 women in the county who knew precisely what I was worth. In June, the photo editor from Southern Heritage came to schedule the finale shoot. A kind woman with silver hair and an editor's ruthlessness. The magazine wanted the estate alive, not velvet ropes, but the garden doing what it was restored to do. The first event on the books after final inspection was the August wedding, and the trust's media clause covered venue events. She was already talking cover shots. I reminded her of my carve-out. No personal interviews. She didn't argue. She did something worse. She was honest. "We'll respect that, Ms. Okafor, but understand what it means. We photograph the gardens either way. The story runs either way. Your name is in the trust documents and the credits. That part isn't yours to hide anymore. The only thing you control is whether the person in the story is a name in small print or a woman standing in her own garden." She let that sit, then added gently the sentence that followed me around for a month. "In my experience, when the subject won't speak, someone else always will. Stories don't stay they just change narrators." I walked the finished rose beds after she left and lay down on the grass under the restored arbor. And for the first time, the silence there didn't feel like sanctuary. It felt like a draft coming through a joint I'd never sealed. All my life, I'd told myself invisibility was humility, but invisibility isn't a neutral act. Not really. It's a vacancy, and vacancies get filled. My mother had been narrating me for 35 years. 2 librarians and garden clubs and future in-laws, and I had held the pen for her by saying nothing. I could keep hiding from the camera. I could not keep hiding from the name I had finally learned to sign. Camille came to the nursery in July. 7 weeks out from the wedding, carrying fabric swatches as a passport. She had never seen the greenhouse either. Unlike our mother, she looked, wandered the rows, touched the memorial oak's leaves, picked up a pair of pruning shears and put them down like they might be loaded. "Has it always smelled like this? Soil and cut stems," I said. "Since I opened." She circled a while, swatches forgotten, then sat on Ruth's old stool and came apart a little in the contained way pageant girls are taught. "The Ashworths were lovely," she said. That was the problem. Lovely in a language she was still learning. They talked about board seats and provenance, and she'd nod and file words away to look up in the car. Mom had the wedding scheduled down to the minute. She laughed wetly, including a family photo slot, timed for when the photo crew broke for lunch. "She thinks of everything." Then she looked around my nursery at 14 years of patient work and said the thing she'd actually come to say. "You're lucky, Del. Nobody expects anything from you." She meant it kindly. That's the worst part. I handed her back her swatches and said as gently as the truth allows, "That's not luck, Camille. That's a sentence. I've just finished serving it." She left with wet eyes and perfect posture, and at the door, she stopped. And for a second, I saw the 8-year-old who used to hide in my room when our mother's disappointment went looking for a target. "The photo crew," she said. "Mom got their lunch break in writing. She planned around you, Delphine. She always plans around you." We finished the gardens the first Friday in August, and Cedarla got its bloom back. I wish I could hand you what the estate did that evening. Late sun through ancient oaks, 60 years of neglect gone, and the heirloom roses climbing the restored arbor in colors. The original planter mixed the year my great-grandmother was born. The trust director stood in the middle of the fountain courtyard and forgot to finish her sentence. The inspection passed without a note. And then two people from the trust did something I hadn't requested and couldn't prevent. They mounted a small bronze marker by the garden gate, per foundation policy. The same policy that credits architects and dead landscapers. Formal garden restoration. Okafor Studio. 2026. 4 inches of metal. My name in public at the scale of 2 fingers. I stood in front of it longer than I will admit to you. And I thought about a sign with no first name and a career of last pages. And I felt the marker doing something no therapy had managed. It made the work exist in the same world as me. That's when I heard footsteps on the gravel path. My mother with the wedding planner, doing their walkthrough. She saw me, saw the marker, and read it the way you'd read a lab result. For a moment, nothing on her face moved at all. Then she turned to the planner with her hostess smile and said, indicating the gate, indicating my name. A trellis would soften this corner, don't you think? Something climbing. The planner made a note. My mother walked on into the sunlit garden her daughter had raised from ruin, trailing a to-do list, planning her trellis. The night before the wedding. I had a legitimate reason to be on the property. Final irrigation check. Contractor's privilege, and I used it the way people use churches after hours. I walked the whole garden one last time, and I talked to it the way I used to talk to Ruth, which is to say, quietly, and expecting better answers than I deserve. Tomorrow, the estate would be full of Ashworths and Lilies and a photo crew, and somewhere in the middle of it, my family's version of me and my own version were going to occupy the same acre for the first time. We don't hide the damage, I said to the fountain, we make it strong enough to hold. So I set my terms plainly the way you set a graft. I would go as a guest and a sister, and I would be glad, genuinely, because Marcus is a good man. And Camille, under all the pageant polish, is my sister. I would not perform. I would not campaign. I would not stand in front of any camera on purpose. But if the truth walked up and asked me a direct question, I was done lying to its face. That was the whole boundary. It fit on an index card. It had taken me 35 years to draft. I locked up my kit, and my phone buzzed in the dark garden. The editor, looking forward to tomorrow. Heads up. Someone from your family called the magazine this afternoon, introduced herself as the family spokesperson, wanted to preview our questions. I stood under the arbor with the phone glowing in my hand. Of course she had. Narrators don't retire. They have to be replaced. The editor had declined her politely and completely. Magazine policy. No third-party approvals. And per the transparency clause, she was obligated to tell the trust's contractor about the contact, meaning me. My mother had called a national magazine to manage my coverage, and the only thing she'd accomplished was making sure I heard about it with time to think. Wedding morning was blue and merciless, the kind of August day photographers pray for. My phone lit up at 9. Camille, just keep it vague tonight. Del, please, just tonight. Vague. The family's word for me in the end. Not a lie. Exactly. A soft focus. A trellis in front of a marker. I typed and deleted an answer 4 times. Then sent the only thing that was true and kind at the same time. I'll be exactly your sister. Promise. I put on the sage green dress, the only thing I own that has never been within 10 feet of a potting bench, and I looked in the mirror over Ruth's old wash basin. Not between jobs. Not a bit lost. A woman with 10 months of a garden in her shoulders and her own name freshly cast in bronze. Going to a wedding where the script called for her to be scenery. Here's what I'll say about my sister's wedding, and I say it without a gram of irony. It was beautiful. The garden was drowning in white roses. The quartet was good, and when Camille walked down the restored arbor path, my path, every stone of which I had set like a patient, even I forgot the arbor, she was radiant, and Marcus looked at her the way Ruth used to look at unsalvageable gardens that got saved anyway, and I cried actual tears into an actual monogrammed napkin, because she is my sister, and I am not made of stone. My mother ran the event like a conductor, and I'll give her this forever. She was magnificent. Every transition greased, every great aunt shepherded, every variable managed, almost every variable, because through the ceremony and into the reception, quietly on long lenses from the terrace, the Southern Heritage crew was photographing the garden being alive, and the garden, my garden, was performing over all our heads. Guests kept looking around. You could watch it travel table to table, the little turn of heads toward the arbor, the roses, the fountain. Ashworth cousins from 4 states asking each other who did all this. Vivian Ashworth raised her champagne to me across the courtyard, a toast the size of a secret, and I watched the editor notice that toast, track it back to me, and check her watch against the light. The lunch break my mother had negotiated was, I understood with total clarity, not the same as the dinner segment they now wanted. She came to my table between the toasts and the cake, crouched by my chair, and kept her voice in the range meant for confessionals. Lights in 10 minutes. One segment. The restorer under the restored garden. The trust has confirmed to the magazine that you're here. One sentence. Ms. Okafor, you can decline. And we shoot the garden without you, but I'd be lying if I said it would be the same story. I opened my mouth, and a hand closed on my elbow. Warm, manicured, absolute. My mother, smiling her hostess smile at the editor. Excuse us. She's needed for family photos, steering me through a garden gate into the back path by the kitchen tent, where the flowers give way to catering trucks and the truth of any venue lives. She turned to me, and the smile fell off like a price tag. Not tonight. Don't embarrass us. The old sentence, third time in my life it would matter. And this time I heard everything packed inside it. The hand-me-down shoes, the whispers at pickup, 40 years of getting this family's name clean. And then my mother, who does not negotiated, which is how I knew she was afraid. You step into that light in your little dress and tell them your trade at your sister's wedding. And you make the whole night about you. Do that, and don't come to Sunday dinner. I mean it, Delphine. I have never meant anything more. There it was. The full price, printed clearly. No hidden fees. The family, such as it was, versus the name, such as I'd built it. I didn't raise my voice. In 10 months of weekend labor and soil under my nails, I had rehearsed versions of this fight where I was devastating, and standing in the actual path, I wanted none of them. Mom, the year you were 16, the shoes. Her face went white, then a furious pink. Who told? And stopped, because there was only one who, and he was seating great-aunts 40 feet away, and some part of her chose right there not to spend him. I understand what you've been running from my whole life, I said. I finally do. But Mom, I'm not the groundskeeper's daughter to be whispered about. I'm not the whisper. I'm the garden. I'm the thing this whole county is standing in tonight. Her grip on my elbow loosened, not to release me, recalibrating. And then my mother did the last thing in her arsenal, the true last thing. She let me see the wound. Her eyes filled, and her voice, when it came, was not the billing office. It was 16 and wearing hand-me-down shoes. Respectable is all I have, Delphine. It's all I ever had. The path hummed. Refrigeration trucks. Probably. I know, I said, and I meant it as tenderly as anything I've ever said. I'm giving it back to you. All of it. I'm only taking my name. I lifted her hand off my elbow, the way I lift a stake when a plant has finally rooted on its own. No yank, no drama, a quarter turn, and it simply lets go, because its work is done. And the plant is either strong now or it never will be. I walked toward the courtyard. Behind me, she said, quiet, almost to herself. You'll regret this. And for the first time in my life, it sounded less like a curse than a question. I stepped back into the light. The camera was already running. They brought up the garden lights along the arbor, and 160 conversations rolled to a stop as the restored rosebeds ignited gold in the evening air. People who had been eating dinner beside them for 2 hours saw them for the first time. That's what light does. It's the difference between a garden and a revelation. And into the hush, the editor asked me softly, and who are you? Delphine Okafor, I said. I restored these gardens. It took 10 months and 180 years. A ripple, laughter and awe getting along for once. She asked what the work was really under the horticulture, and I gave her Ruth, because the truth is, I've only ever had the one sermon. My teacher used to say, we don't hide the damage, we make it strong enough to hold. Everything in this garden has failed at least once. That's not the shameful part. That's the load-bearing part. I watched that land on faces, on the trust director, on an Ashworth cousin, on my father standing at the edge of the courtyard with his hands folded, crying without fuss, the way quiet men cry. And then the question I'd been bracing for since the path. Your family here tonight, I'm told. Who gets the credit for all this talent? The revenge was right there. Gift-wrapped national. One sentence about a mother who answered letters in my name. I looked into the lens and felt the whole arsenal pass through my hands and set it down. My teacher was Ruth Pemberton, who restored gardens like this her whole life. Everything else I owe to this soil. Applause started somewhere near the cake and took the courtyard like weather. Marcus stood first, Vivian second, then everyone. My sister in white, hands over her mouth, the garden burning gold over all of it, and the camera panning the family table found one chair empty. Its napkin folded with terrible neatness. My mother had left before the applause started. She missed the cake. She missed her own triumph, is the thing. The wedding of the decade executed to the minute, and the last minute belonged to the daughter in the sage green dress. My dad stayed. He stood beside me while the crew coiled cables, not saying much, holding 2 glasses of champagne like they were evidence. And finally, he touched the sleeve of my dress and said, "The groundskeeper's granddaughter, look at you," which I will keep forever. Camille found me by the marker, mascara gone abstract, bouquet dangling. For a second, neither of us knew which family we were from. Then she said, "You didn't lie this time." And I said, "I never did." My sister looked around at the garden of her own wedding for a long, long moment. Doing math, it takes decades to do. "It's the most beautiful place I've ever stood," she said. "It always was." I said it just needed somebody patient. She hugged me with the full pageant-trained strength of her and whispered that the trellis was mine to move, by the way. She'd signed the request. My sister. There's hope in that girl yet. That night, back at my nursery, I sat with a cup of tea and watched my inbox do something it had never done. 3 estates, 2 historical societies, a university landscape program, all before midnight, and 1 text from my mother, time-stamped 9:41, which I will translate for you into fluent Sandra. The trellis would have looked better. I laughed alone in my kitchen until the kettle joined in. I didn't answer. Some grafts you leave unclamped and let the plant decide. I had spent 14 years restoring other people's names while hiding mine like a wound I kept covering over. That part of the story ran tonight, and it was over. The feature published that spring. 8 pages of gardens and 40 words from a woman in sage green telling the truth about damage. Here's the aftermath, measured, because I don't deal in miracles. The nursery is booked out 2 years. I hired 2 apprentices. One of them left a marketing degree half-finished to learn soil chemistry. My family did not collapse. Because families like mine don't collapse. They rebrand. My mother goes to the same church, sits in the same pew, and tells the same women, I'm reliably informed her business is doing quite well. The trellis is not mentioned. The wedding is described as featured nationally, with the source of the featuring left gracefully vague. The force my mother serves didn't die at that wedding. It never dies. It just updates its slogans. What changed is smaller and bigger than that. It doesn't run me anymore. Sunday dinners went on without me, and the strangest discovery of my year was that I wasn't hungry at that hour. My dad comes by the nursery every other Wednesday. He drinks his coffee on the potting bench, learns the names of roses the way other men learn ball players, and never once tells me what my mother says about the article. Sometimes love is just showing up on alternate Wednesdays and mispronouncing hydrangea with total commitment. I'll take it. A year on, Camille came to the nursery a second time. No swatches, no pretext. Carrying our grandmother's old rosebush in a cracked terracotta pot, its roots half exposed. She sat on Ruth's old stool for 2 hours and watched me repot it and asked real questions and used the word cultivar correctly, and then grinned at herself. We are learning a new language, my sister and I, slowly, without a phrase book. I'm Delphine Okafor, 36 now, and this year, when strangers ask what I do, there's a bronze marker, a magazine feature, and a booked calendar that answered before I can. But I answer anyway, out loud, first person, every single time. If I've learned one thing worth the price I paid for it, it's this. You can spend your whole life waiting for your family to say your name, right? Or you can sign it yourself and let the work say the rest. That's my story. The dinner where they told me to lie. The garden I brought back to life. The chair that sat empty when my name finally rang out. If this stayed with you, share it with someone whose work goes unseen. And subscribe to Calm Drama Vault. There's a new story every week about quiet women finding their voice. And one of them might sound like yours.